I recently went on a 3-month trip backpacking around Europe, and I've tracked all of my spending so I can share it with you guys. You'll be able to see what was worth it, what wasn't, and hopefully give you guys an idea of how much you'll need if you're planning to do something similar. The total amount wasn't as much as you think, so stick around and let's get to it. So just for some background, I spent 3 months backpacking around Europe last year. I went from the 20th of July 2022 to October 12th, I believe it was. So around 86 days in total. I was fortunate enough to go to 22 different cities. I won't go through all of them, but I have made a video which I will link above if you guys want to check that out. The first thing we're going to go through is the price of accommodation. So what I've done is I've basically broken down the location I stayed at, the hostel I was at, how many nights I was in that hostel, the price of the hostel per night, and just the total price. One thing to keep in note is that the prices are in Australian dollars. So at the time of recording, that I believe is about 0.66 US dollars, and I'll put a conversion rate pop up for you guys now as well. So the first place I went to was London, and I stayed at a hostel called Wombat City Hostel, which was near Tower Bridge. It was quite a nice hostel, and I was there for 5 nights. Price was around $60 a night, and the total was around $306.19. So I won't go through every single one because we'll be here for ages, but what I'll do is I'll sort it by the most to the least, just so you guys can get an understanding of what places were expensive and what places weren't that expensive. So Paris surprisingly came out to be the most expensive hostel that I stayed at, which was around 80 Australian dollars a night. Paris was, I found, not the best place for cheap accommodation. Paris itself isn't the most expensive city in Europe. When it comes to accommodation, it certainly felt like it was quite an expensive place. The hostel itself wasn't actually that close to the city centre either, so you had to catch the metro wherever you went. Zermatt, pretty obvious that's going to be expensive. That's in Switzerland, around $78 a night. And then the third one was Barcelona, which was also surprising. So Spain is not the most expensive, but not the cheapest city either. But Barcelona is very, very touristy, so it is quite understandable why it was the most expensive place that I stayed at in Spain, at around $75 a night. So those are the top 3 most expensive. If we look at the cheapest 3, coming as a surprise to me, Venice was the 3rd cheapest place that I stayed at. And this was actually quite a nice hostel as well. It wasn't actually on the main island of Venice. There's a main island, and then there's the sort of mainland Italy. So this was on the mainland, and you had to catch a train every day to get to Venice. Train was very cheap, I think only around €2 each way. So definitely a good hostel. I definitely recommend this one. So that was around $48 a night, and I was there for 2 nights. The second cheapest was Munich, which also comes as a surprise to me. So Munich is in Germany, and it is also not the cheapest city, but when it comes to hostels, it does seem to be a pretty affordable place to spend some nights, which was a surprise to me. Around $39 a night, and I was there for 4 nights. So that was very pleasant to see that price. And then the cheapest place was Krakow, which was, honestly, I don't know how these guys even make a profit. So Greg and Tom Beer House Hostel is the place that I stayed at, and they do free beers, free breakfast, free dinner, and it's located in the middle of the city centre in Krakow, and it was only $24 a night, which is absolutely incredible value for money. So if you do visit Krakow, I definitely recommend staying at this hostel. So if you look at the total price of all of these, it comes to around $4,869.58. For 3 months, I think that's a pretty good price for accommodation. Once again, accommodation is something that is a necessary expense that you're going to have to pay when it comes to traveling, but it's going to be the thing that you remember the least about your travels. So try and stay in budget hostels. Try and save as much money as you can on accommodation, because it's going to be the experiences and the things you do that's going to be the most memorable rather than the accommodation that you stay at. Another thing that I will point out is that if you are going to be traveling to Europe, a good place to go if you are on a budget is either Eastern Europe or the very west of Europe. So that is cities in the east of Europe, such as Krakow, Prague, Budapest. These are all cities that can be classified in sort of Central Eastern Europe, and they're going to be much more cheaper than cities that are in like the Central European areas like Paris, Amsterdam, Barcelona, for example. And you can see, for instance, that the prices make it look like that as well. So yeah, that's the total, $4,869.58 for the accommodation. Moving on to the transport. When you're going to be traveling Europe, chances are you're going to be catching trains, buses, planes to get from place to place. And during my 3 months in Europe, I did catch quite a few trains, planes, and surprisingly no buses, which is actually quite good because buses aren't the most reliable. So what I've done here is I've broken the date I took each journey, where the journey started and where it ended, the mode of transport, as well as the actual provider of the transport. So like I did with the accommodation, we'll go through the top 3 and the bottom 3 ones only, just to save some time. The first thing was actually getting to Europe. So first thing I had to do was book a flight. What I did was I just looked at where the cheapest city to fly into from Sydney, where I'm currently based, is in Europe. So that came to be London. I booked a one-way flight from Sydney to London via British Airways, and it came to $1,216.12. In hindsight, I wish I booked a return ticket because there would have been maybe about 50% more, and I would have saved on the expense that I had coming back from Europe, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. The next thing that I did after London was I came to Paris via the train. I caught the Eurostar, which is quite a luxury train, and I didn't have the cheapest option. I believe there's 3 or 4 tiers that you can take. I believe I had the middle tier, and that was around $259.70. You can definitely do this much cheaper. There's a lot of budget airlines like Ryanair, Wizz Air. Definitely recommend those over the Eurostar train if you are trying to be very conscious of your budget. The reason I took the train as opposed to a plane is that I believe the journey is just a couple of hours and you're going to be arriving in the very central part of the city that you arrive in. So even if a flight is, say, half the price, factor in the transport that you're going to have to take and the time that's going to be wasted getting from your airport to your hostel. So even if it's half the price, you may spend loads and loads more money on actual transport from getting from the airport to your hostel. So factor that in when you are deciding on whether it's more valuable to take the train or the plane. After Paris, I flew to Lisbon. This was also quite a big price to be paying for a flight, especially within Europe. But I believe the reason for that high price is that it was on a Sunday. If you do take flights, I recommend taking them on either Tuesdays or Thursdays. I've found are the cheapest. And usually you can get this flight for around $100. So I had no choice. I was booking everything quite last minute. So the prices do go up as the date comes closer. So do factor that in mind. I'll just go through another one just because we can have that as a nice example. So I had a flight from Lisbon to Madrid and that was only $36. So less than 10 times the price. You can see that if you go on certain days and if you fly certain routes, it's going to be much cheaper. So do factor that in mind. Let's look at the last 3 ones. So I caught a train from Amsterdam to Brussels and that was the IC Brussels train and it was $53.25. One thing that I'll mention is that when it comes to booking trains in Europe, you have a couple of different options. There's third-party apps like Trainline, Omeo, and there's other ways to book where you can book directly with the train provider. I found that booking directly via the train provider, it's going to be a bit of a more convoluted process, but you're going to save a lot of money in the long term. The benefit of the applications, the third-party applications, is that you're just going to have a bit of a more seamless booking experience and it's going to be just a bit more user-friendly. If you spend a couple extra more minutes and book directly via the train provider's website, you'll be able to save a lot more money and you'll be on the same train. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. So you can see here, I booked these directly via the train companies. I would say if I had booked it via the third-party companies, I would have probably paid maybe 10-20% more. So not the most price difference, but it is something to consider because it does add up in the long run. And then my flight back to Sydney, I had to book a flight back from where I was ending my trip. So I was ending my trip in Paris and I was flying back to Sydney. And you can see here, it's not the most direct of flights. So I had 3 different stopovers and the price was $1,334.84. So as I mentioned before, I wish I did book a return flight. I would have probably got a return flight from Sydney to London for about $1,500. But in this instance, I almost doubled that. So in hindsight, I could have saved a lot of money just by booking a return. Another thing I can mention to save money is catch buses. I know Flixbus is very cheap and affordable in Europe. You could probably get a Flixbus for about half the price of a lot of these different prices that I've written here. So keep that in mind. It will take a bit longer, obviously, because the buses are going on the roads and they won't be as quick. If you are on a budget, just make sure to consider buses because you will save a lot of money in the long run, especially if you are traveling for quite a long time. In hindsight, I definitely reckon I could have saved 50% off this price. First of all, I should have booked a return flight. I probably should have flew from London to Paris. Paris to Lisbon is a bit inevitable, $493. If I had gone on another day, probably prices could have been half the price. Small things like that, just factor those in and you can save a lot of money on transport. Now, the next expense is the food and drink. So Europe has a lot of good dining and drinking options. So I definitely recommend if you are traveling to enjoy yourself a bit, don't hold back. If you want to try something, try it. Don't be too stingy when it comes to food and drinks, because I feel like that is a big part of traveling, is to just enjoy the local cuisine, enjoy the local restaurants. You're not going to get food like that anywhere else, or at least not close. So if you do want to try something, I do definitely recommend just don't worry too much about the price and you won't regret it. So we can see here all the different locations that I was at, how many nights I was there. And what I've done is I've just broken down an average of the per night cost of food and drinks. So what we'll do is we'll sort the per night price by largest to smallest, just so you guys can get an idea of how much I spent and what was the most expensive and cheapest places. So first of all was London. So no surprise there. London is probably one of the top 3 most expensive places in Europe, I'd say, probably just after Switzerland. And you can see here, London for food and drinks was $116.07. I can confidently say that half of that was just for drinking and nights out, buying drinks. So if you are not going to be drinking or don't drink, you can easily save half the amounts of money that I've written here. Drinks are extortionate, especially in clubs and bars. A tip I have is just to pre-drink. If you are going to be going out and you do want to get a bit of a buzz, don't buy drinks at the actual place, just buy them at a supermarket. You'll save a ton of money. So London, that definitely came as a surprise to me. As I said, half of that is probably just buying alcohol, so keep that in mind. The next place was Nice. So Nice is in the south of France. Nice is a very holiday-oriented town, so a lot of the prices are a bit higher than sort of even Paris, for instance. And you can see here I spent $79.60. A reason that Nice has such a high price is that I did take a day trip to Monaco. So Monaco is probably, I'd say, the second most expensive place in Europe, just after Switzerland. I remember a bottle of water there was around €5. Decent meal at a restaurant was around 20-30 euros. So that's inflated the price a bit, but $79.60 per night for eating out and drinks in Nice is quite high. Third place, no surprise, Interlaken. Interlaken was in Switzerland and I was there for 2 nights and I spent on an average $79.44 per night. I did save a lot of money by just shopping at supermarkets, and I believe the hostel did have a free breakfast. But what I did that I think raised the price a lot was I did do a hike at the top of Interlaken. It's called the Harder Kulm to August Matterhorn hike. And there is a restaurant there, so I didn't really have any food with me. So what I did was I did get a meal, and that was ridiculously expensive. I think about 40 or 50 Swiss francs. And it definitely wasn't worth it, but I had no other option. And I didn't want to do this hard hike without any energy. But that does inflate the price a lot. So you can do Interlaken and I'd say Switzerland as a whole on a budget. Just shop at the supermarkets and you could easily half this price, no problem at all. You can see here all the different prices. We won't go through all of them, but we'll go through the last 3. Lisbon was incredible. Lisbon is $33.29 a night for food and drinks, which is actually absolutely amazing. And the food and drinks is some of the best in all of Europe in Lisbon. I remember when I was there, I'd usually go to my phone and look for restaurants with a minimum of 4.5 stars. And I kid you not, everything in Lisbon was minimum 4.5 stars. So if you are a foodie, you like food, you like going out, like drinks, Lisbon should be at the very top of your list. It's absolutely incredible. Krakow, also incredible. $27.43 per night. I remember I had like good restaurant meals there and they were the equivalent of around 10 euros. It's absolutely incredible in Krakow. It's very non-touristy as well, I found, and the prices overall for everything is very cheap. So Krakow, also definitely a great place. Prague, absolutely incredible. One of my most favorite cities in Europe, and also very good on your budget. So $25.45 only for food and drinks in Prague. Prague, Krakow, Lisbon, all very good, all very affordable, and also really good foodie cities, and I definitely recommend them. All in all, Total was around 4,575. I feel like that is a very good price that I paid for 3 months of traveling. I never had a night where I felt like that I was going hungry or I was ever not able to eat because I was too constrained on my budget. So I feel like you could save easily about 20-30% off that budget. I did have a lot of restaurant meals just because, as I said, I find eating out is part of travel. Enjoying the local cuisine, trying out the local restaurants is something that I enjoy. But if you're just going to be having food from supermarkets, eating at fast food places, you could easily save 20-30% off this bill, no problem. So the next expense was the attractions, and you can see here I've broken them down into 3 columns. We've got the location, the actual attraction I saw, as well as the price for that attraction. In London, I went to a nightclub that was around $19, pretty standard. Quite memorable. I do enjoy going out, and it is quite a justified price I find for $19, so I do not regret spending money on that. Paris, I went to a couple different things. Palace of Versailles, Saint-Chapelle, the Louvre, Orsay Museum. Out of this list, I definitely wouldn't recommend Saint-Chapelle. It's very nice, but for the price, you're only going to spend about 15 minutes in that building. And you're much better off just spending a couple more dollars than going to a museum, for instance. Like the Louvre, you could spend the whole day in the Louvre. Same with the Orsay Museum. Both much more worth it than Saint-Chapelle. Palace of Versailles, you could spend a day in as well, and it was very beautiful. It is a bit of a day trip, and for the price, it's justified. I do really like it. But if I had to pick one from Paris, I'd say the Orsay Museum was the most memorable. Total for Paris, $136.06. In Lisbon, I went to Sintra, which is a day trip out of Lisbon, and I do definitely recommend it. Just be sure that the weather's alright. When I went, it was very cloudy and overcast, so you couldn't really see much, but for the price, it's definitely worth it, and I do definitely recommend it. In Madrid, I went to the Prado Museum. Definitely don't think that the price justifies it. It's a nice museum, but after seeing the stuff in Paris, nothing really compares. For $32.74, if you're into art, Prado Museum is really nice, but personally, I don't really think that it was worth the price. Picasso Museum, $11.46. This was nice, but it only had a lot of drawings rather than paintings of Picasso. But for the price, it's not too bad. You could spend a couple hours there. I believe this is the Olympic pool, as it's called in Barcelona, and this was very nice. This was not touristy at all. It was great because it was about 40 degrees in Barcelona when I was there, and just spending the day chilling at the Olympic pool was really nice. And for the price, you could spend the whole day there, so I definitely recommend that. Moog, Opium, and Pacha, these are all nightclubs, and for the prices, they're pretty stock standard. My favorite from them is probably Opium. Quite a touristy place, but it's quite nice. Moog is more of a techno place, so if that's your thing, you can go there. Quite a small venue though. Park Güell, to be honest, I wasn't really a fan of it, but it is a nice attraction, and you could spend a whole day there as well, $16.37. Total in Barcelona, $153.95. Nice, I actually didn't do anything other than take a day trip to Monaco. I was fortunate that one of my friends at the hostel had a car, and we just went to Nice together and didn't really have to spend any money on attractions in Nice, so that was nice. Cinque Terre. So in Cinque Terre, I got a Cinque Terre card, which permits you access to the hiking trails in Cinque Terre, and it allows you access to the trains between each towns. Next stop after Cinque Terre was Florence, where I did a couple different things. I took 2 day trips, one to Pisa, one to Siena. Out of those 2, I definitely recommend Siena. Pisa's just a bit tourist trappy. There's just nothing there except for the Leaning Tower. You only need half an hour there, and it's not worth it. I'd rather go to Siena. Siena's like a small, really nice city. In and of itself, you can spend a day in Siena, no problem. So if you want to take a day trip from Florence, I definitely recommend Siena over Pisa. Uffizi Gallery, $39.30, definitely a bit overpriced, but it is, I think, if I recall correctly, it was 2 levels, and you could spend a good couple of hours there. The only downside I found was it was very touristy. I found that overall in the museums in Italy, they don't have limits on how many people can enter, so it's very crowded. The attractions and paintings are all very hard to see unless you can get very close to them, so do keep that in mind. And then I went to the Accademia Gallery, which is where the statue of David is, and I feel like that's a decent price, but that museum is very small. It's just catered to seeing the statue of David. But if you are into that, for the price, it's pretty good. Total for Florence, $120.23. After Florence, I went to Rome. and I did a couple things. So I went to the Roman Forum and the Colosseum, which I believe is like a combination. If you buy the Colosseum ticket, you also get a ticket for the Roman Forum. That was $34.38. I definitely recommend that. Very worth it. I spent one day going to the Colosseum and one day going to the Roman Forum. That was, for the price, I reckon, very worth it. The other day I went to the Vatican museums, which was also very nice. Keep in mind that it does get very crowded, so do go there early. And for the price, $34.38, you can spend the whole day there, and I definitely recommend that. Total for Rome, $68.76. After Rome, went to Venice, did the day trips to the small islands of Burano and Murano, where you have to catch a ferry, and that is $24.56. Definitely worth it. I reckon Burano and Murano were more enjoyable than Venice itself, just because there's much less tourists there, and it's just got unique things that aren't really on the main Venice island itself, so I definitely recommend that. After Venice, I went to Milan. Milan, I went to the Brera Art Gallery, $24.56. I guess at this stage, I had been to so many art galleries and museums that I had really stopped appreciating them as much. So for the price, $24.56, I don't think it's the best option when it comes to budget. But if you are into art and you want to spend some money and see some nice artworks, it is, I reckon, a good price. I also had a experience where I saw a football game. So Inter Milan versus Cremonese was happening. And I got some tickets to go see that match. And that was definitely enjoyable for the price. That's $51.96. Packed stadium, 70,000 fans, and it's just a really nice and memorable experience that I have. So I definitely recommend, if you are in Milan, go to a football match, and it's going to be a great atmosphere, great vibe. So the total for Milan, $76.52. Alrighty, the next stop was Lucerne. I didn't do anything at Lucerne, no money spent there. Interlaken, I did a couple day trips. So I went to Lauterbrunnen and to Wengen. From those day trips, definitely recommend Lauterbrunnen. Lauterbrunnen, you could spend maybe half a day, and for the price, it's definitely worth it. Absolutely stunning scenery. Wengen's also nice, but it's more expensive than Lauterbrunnen, and I found there's not much to do there. Out of those day trips, definitely recommend Lauterbrunnen. And in Interlaken, I also took a funicular, which is one of those steep trains that go to the top of the mountain. And that was $51.05. And considering that's only going to take you like 5 minutes and you spend $51, it's quite ridiculous. But the only other option to get up there is to take a hike up there, which takes a couple of hours. I think about 2-3 hours to do. And personally, I didn't want to spend that kind of time hiking and then just get exhausted, because I was getting to the top of the mountain because there is a hike that starts from there. So I took the funicular up there, $51.05, and I don't think it's worth it, but if you don't want to hike, you don't really have any other options. So total for Interlaken, $89.68. In Zermatt, didn't really spend any money on attractions. In Munich, I went to the BMW Museum, $16.38. I'm quite a big car enthusiast, so I feel like this was definitely justified. Keep in mind that there is a BMW museum and there's a BMW World. BMW World is actually free, so it's like a smaller version of the museum, BMW World, so that's the free version. And then there's the BMW Museum, which costs money. I also went to art gallery, but for the price, $11.47. That's definitely recommended. I also took a day trip to Neuschwanstein Castle, so spent $84.16. Quite expensive, but it is a really beautiful castle, and I definitely recommend you try and visit it if you are in Munich. There's a bus that takes you to the castle from the train station where the Neuschwanstein Castle area is, or you can just walk and kind of hike to the castle. I chose to just walk and hike, and it's only about a half an hour, 1 hour hike. For the price, it's a bit steep, but it is one of those nice things that people want to see in Europe. So if you do want to go there, I definitely recommend it. Total for Munich, 112.1 cents. In Vienna, I went to the Natural History Museum, $34.39. I don't think that was worth it. It didn't really have many exhibits open, and a lot of it was closed. When I did go, they did have a function, like a private function organized. So a lot of the rooms were closed. And to be honest, I think I only spent about an hour and a half there. And for the price, it wasn't worth it. Vienna as a whole, it's a very, very expensive city. And you're going to have a hard time finding a lot of budget attractions in Vienna. One thing that I did like in Vienna was I went to the Prater amusement park. And I went on this one crazy ride there that goes 360 degrees and you're spinning around. And that was $8.19, €5. And that was definitely one of the most memorable times and experiences that I had in Vienna. So I definitely recommend when you're in Vienna, go to the Prater amusement park and try some of the rides there. Total for Vienna, $42.58. Next up, Budapest. So I did a couple things here. Went to the Museum of Fine Arts, Pinball Museum, and I went on a boat party. Hungarian National Gallery, $12.56. That's an absolute steal. That was the gallery that's at the top of Budapest, and it's got a really nice view of the city, and it's got a lot of nice artwork, and for the price, that's absolutely amazing. House of Terror I really liked as well. I did do an audio guide there, so that did inflate the price a bit, but it is really interesting if you are into that sort of World War II history. I definitely recommend that. Museum of Fine Arts, $20.81. Decent price, but to be honest, all of the art galleries kind of blend together at this point of your trip. For the price, it's alright, but definitely not one of the most memorable art galleries I've been to. One thing that was memorable was the Pinball Museum. So the Pinball Museum, it's a museum where they have pinball machines from, I think, as early as like the 1950s all the way up to the modern times, and they all work. So you can play on them as much as you want. They all work, and we spent like 2-3 hours there, and I definitely recommend visiting the Pinball Museum when you are in Budapest. Another thing that went on in Budapest, which was memorable, was the boat party. On the boat party, you can have different packages. You can get like the pay-as-you-go drinks option. You get the drinks option where you get unlimited drinks, and I had the unlimited drinks option, which was around 38 euros, around $62. And that was definitely recommended. And they free pour the drinks, so do be careful. Total for Budapest, $134.59. And considering the amount of stuff that I did there, I think it's a pretty good value. After Budapest, I went to Krakow, where I did a day trip to Auschwitz, and I also went to a shooting range. A bit unfortunate, the circumstances and the city that I was in, that I went to a shooting range after Auschwitz, but what can I do? Auschwitz was definitely a solemn and sad experience, but I think it was definitely worth it. For the price, they take you from Krakow to Auschwitz and back, and they do a guided tour there as well, which I think for the price is definitely recommended. It was a day trip as well, so for the whole day, $34.93, definitely recommended. I also went to a shooting range. So shooting range, you definitely don't need to visit, but I was in Krakow for a couple of days and I had some time to kill. So I went to a shooting range with some friends, and they have obviously different packages that you can buy. So we just got, I think, the second cheapest one, which was $38.27. That was very memorable and very enjoyable. First time I've ever shot a gun. So that was a unique experience, and yeah, I really enjoyed that. Total for Krakow, $73.20. After Krakow, I went to Prague. In Prague, the only expense that I had for attractions was I went to a planetarium. I was in like the less touristy side of Prague, and there was a planetarium nearby, so I was like, may as well check it out. And for the price, $10.96, it's not bad. I think I spent maybe hour and a half there. After Prague, I went to Berlin, where I went to Tresor, a nightclub. That was absolutely fantastic. I love techno, and Berlin's one of the best places in the world, if not the best place in the world for techno. And Tresor is one of the best clubs there. I think I spent 12 hours in there, and for the price, $16.36 is absolutely a bargain. So I definitely recommend that. In Amsterdam, I went to the Body Worlds Museum. This is probably the coolest museum I've ever seen. This is all human bodies that have been donated, and they're all deconstructed, and you can see the muscles and basically the insides of the human body are put on display. So not the best place if you have a sensitive stomach or you get a bit queasy, but I definitely found it very interesting, and for the price, I definitely recommend it. After Amsterdam, I went to Brussels and I saw another art gallery, $16.36. This was also a very beautiful art gallery, and I did really like it. I do definitely recommend that. And the last stop was Paris, where I chose to visit the Orsay Museum because I think that's one of the most beautiful museums in the world. I'd recommend Orsay Museum over the Louvre, and I spent $26.20 there. Total, $1,124.67. All in all, I think that's definitely a decent price. It's the attractions and the things you do that's going to be the most memorable, rather than the fancy hotels you stay at or the fancy dishes you eat. It's going to be the attractions, things you do that are going to be the most memorable. So I definitely recommend, don't skimp out on checking out attractions. If you want to do something, do it. Who knows when you're going to be there again. So for the price, I reckon I had a really good time there, and it was not the most expensive. Some things that I will mention that you can categorize as miscellaneous, for instance, are I did have a couple ATM withdrawals that I did, and they totaled $1,343. The reason for this is that a lot of small shops and certain places don't really accept credit cards or debit cards. Travel insurance, I feel like it is a necessary thing that you need to get, and $501.75. It's not the most cheapest travel insurance, but it was a reputable company that I had no problems with, so I feel like for the price it was justified, but there are definitely cheaper options out there. So the next expense was a backpack, so I didn't have any luggage that I was going to take for my trip. I was going to do it all out of a 40-liter backpack, so I bought a Osprey Farpoint 40, and it was absolutely incredible for traveling, and was carry-on approved as well, and price was $175.96. I also bought AirTags. So AirTags, I feel like they came in very useful and just gave you that peace of mind when you're traveling, that you know where your bags are at all times. I definitely didn't need a 4-pack. Could have only got away with just one AirTag, but that was $126.50. Local transport, that was the metro tickets, the short bus rides, the tram tickets that I had to buy in each certain city. So those were $440.76. You could definitely save a lot of money by just like walking everywhere, but you're going to get tired of walking every single place you go. So local transport for 3 months, I feel like that's pretty decent. Souvenirs. So I did buy some certain things when I was traveling. I bought some clothes. I bought a film camera as well. And that was just things that I really liked and wanted to buy when I was traveling. And it's a good memory of your trip. You do buy a couple souvenirs. So total for souvenirs, $218.88. Now I did buy some medicine when I was traveling. I did get a bit sick. I think I did get COVID when I was traveling. I had to buy some medication in a few different cities, and that totaled $66.47. Definitely avoidable. Don't get sick. You won't have to spend that money. Unexpected purchases. So my shoes actually broke in Berlin, so I had to buy a new pair of shoes. There was this pair of Nike shoes that I really liked. Obviously, I don't have to spend such a high amount of money, but I think they were around 250 Australian dollars. But you couldn't buy them anywhere else. They were a limited edition, and looking back on them now, I think I've made a profit buying them because they've gone up quite high in price. Another thing that happened was my actual earphones broke. So I had some wired earphones and they broke, so I had to buy some new earphones. I was like, may as well get something that I'll use back home as well that will last a while. So I got some AirPods Pro. Definitely don't need to spend so much cash on all this stuff. You can get all this stuff for maybe the 10th of the price, but I thought I needed that stuff and I spent that much amount of money, $684.73. Another expense was SIM cards. So I did buy some prepaid SIM cards before going to Europe from a local company, and I bought 3 different SIM cards, and I felt like I chewed through all that data when I was traveling, so I had to buy another SIM card when I was in Rome. So in total, 4 SIM cards for $125.44, which I feel it's pretty decent for 3 months, but something that can definitely be reduced by just shopping around. And I found that the SIM cards that you do get there in the local towns are much cheaper. So if you are going to be traveling to Europe, just buy your SIM cards when you arrive because they will be quite cheaper. So total for all the miscellaneous stuff is $2,340.49. Now then again, a lot of that is the ATM withdrawals. Those can definitely be avoided. So if you don't need to have cash on hand, you don't need to take the money out of the ATM. And another thing to note is I didn't actually spend all this total, so do keep that in mind. So if we look at all of these expenses combined, we've got the accommodation, transport, food and drink, attractions, and all the miscellaneous expenses. If we go to the total, you can see the total is $17,727.24. And I've done a conversion for you guys. US dollars, around 12,000 US dollars and around 11,000 euros. Just before I clarify the total, something I feel that you should note is that the expenses we've got in red here are all expenses that aren't really necessary for everyone. They were necessary for myself personally, but if you are considering doing a trip like this as well, these expenses, which total to $1,838, could be saved, meaning you'd only spend around $16,000 for 3 months travel. Another thing to consider, like as I mentioned, I didn't spend all of the ATM withdrawals. I do have a lot of cash still with me, which I've just kept as a souvenir, but I didn't spend all that amount of money, so this price is a bit inflated. And the last point, which I feel like is quite an important thing to note, is that I've seen that the Australian dollar has weakened around 10% against the euro, and I have done all these calculations in today's money value compared to when I was doing my trip. So I did my trip in July of 2022, and you can see there that the price has decreased for the Australian dollar by around 10.5%. If we were calculating the price during my trip, it would have been around $15,954. Now, was it worth it? I definitely think so. Those 3 months traveling was some of the best experiences and most memorable times that I had. I made a ton of friends, I did a ton of stuff, I saw so many amazing cities, and for the price I feel like I definitely did it on a budget. I could have saved a lot of money by, as I mentioned, catching buses or not eating out, not drinking, but I feel like those are part of the fun. Other than that, I definitely recommend visiting Europe. You won't regret it. Money will come back, but time won't. So if you're thinking about it, just do it. You won't regret it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.